Sweet. Hey everybody. I'm Tamerlane, but I'll introduce myself a little bit more on the next slide. Today, we are going to be talking about monetization, and its downfall in the West. I like to go with these intensive titles, to be eye-catching, and also just give everybody anxiety. It's really important to me. So for the purposes of this, the kind of the discussion is analyzing to an extent the fact that we are in a rampant capitalistic ecosystem. And what that's doing is it's aggressively monetizing consumers, which is having a high probability at having some consequences that we'll discuss as we go through the presentation. But before we dive into that, this is me. I'm Tamerlane. I have 9 years of experience. Well, 10 years of game design experience. I generally specialize in monetization and strategization, and it's kind of like a unique branch of game design. I don't think it's oftentimes that you think about folks looking at game designers and be like, oh yeah, so there's also the guy that focuses on making us money. I would say monetization design is usually how I frame it as making informed decisions on how to optimize making money with the player in mind, rather than looking at things arbitrarily through numbers, which is alternatively what a lot of product managers would do at gaming companies, for example. Um, I have a bachelor's from UC San Diego, a double major, sociology, socioeconomics, and economics. And this is my pedigree of games. I worked on League of Legends, Wild Rift, Teamfight Tactics. Most of my experience in monetization comes through my experiences at Call of Duty Mobile and every game after that, such as The Walking Dead Empires and Kokomo. I'm currently at Other Side Entertainment working with Warren Spector, who's like an industry leader, to make Thick as Thieves and Argos Riders on the Storm. And that's kind of where I'm at now. I have a lot of different things that I've worked on, a lot of different things that I've shipped, and I don't know, I love money. So let's go ahead and go into my next slide. So before we go kind of into before we dive into like the nitty-gritty of the topic, I've kind of recognized as I've done this presentation multiple times that there are definitions that some people know and some people don't know. And I wanted to just take a moment to chat about this. So, gotcha is an example of a mechanic where currency is put in and you get something out. Gamification is when you take elements of games and put it into other areas of activity. An example of that would be that when TikTok's algorithm focuses on like building up models for retention, or you go onto your bank. For some banks actually do this where they have like login streaks, right, to like incentivize you to engage. I wouldn't say they're banks; they're generally financial institutions, but I don't think mainstream banks do this yet. Those are types of gamification that exist. Mindshare is your relative awareness and approximation of attention. I usually frame it as if I exist, um, I have a bandwidth of the number 100, right? 100. And then anything that takes away from my ability to focus on something takes some level of mind share. So right now I'm doing this presentation, I'm talking to you guys, that I'm probably spending 85% mind share on you, right? 15%, I have ADHD. So if I see a squirrel or something, like, I'm going to get distracted. Consumer spend would be aggregation of money that individuals spend on goods and services. Consumer burden, these would be necessities rather than like nice to haves, right? Like groceries, etc. Status, this is a little bit weird. I tend to use the Weber and Marx definition for status, and that is essentially your social display of status, how you convey to other people and what you look like. Whether it be through cosmetics, whether it be through your appearance, that tends to apply to everything, and that tends to be a strong driver as to why people engage in the capitalistic ecosystem in the first place, for status. Then dolphin, minnow, whale. Minnows being little to no spend consumers, dolphins, medium spend, whales, heavy spend. The numbers that correlate with that are contingent on your company and your product. And then shareholder primacy, which is kind of like a Reagan era policy. It's not illegal for a corporation to avoid maximizing and optimizing wealth and returns, but it is somewhat kind of a judicial policy in that your number one prerogative as a corporation that's publicly owned is to your shareholders. Ergo, you must make more money. So let's go to the next slide. So when it comes to monetization, there are some distinct differences that tend to exist, and we have the East, right? I use NetEase as an example, and the West. And to be clear, there's a little bit of irony of me using Blizzard here and NetEase, but it's more of an if you know, you know. The East tends to have a lot of monetization that is kind of instilled in culture. There's a lot of like pay to win mechanisms that exist. There's a hyper competitive nature that tends to exist in a lot of games. And that means that people are generally okay with using every advantage. It's not a huge deal to consumers for them to engage in such a way that they get ahead. And so spend tends to have a very heavy effect on status in these capacities. But in the West, historically, I would say up until like the mid 2010s, right? People were pretty averse to aggressive monetization. I recall there were times when, like, I remember when I was playing World of Warcraft in the early 2010s, late 2000s, in fact, so 2008, 2009. Then they were trying to introduce like little cosmetic mounts, and like, oh man, the community sentiment, like aversion towards the idea of buying MTX mounts was like atrocious. Everyone was like, I hate this, right? And so there was a huge like level of aversion towards this type of aggressive monetization, and people would make assumptions saying like, oh, like this is because like the companies are dictating and are being influenced by the Eastern markets and blah 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 and etc. We had a lot of Western audiences preferring merit rewards, right, versus purchase rewards. It's actually a big reason why the concept of battle passes were introduced, along with some psychological elements. And we also had the one exception to the rule, which was that gambling was always kind of somewhat perceived as skill. I mean, you know, we've made content for years, like around gambling movies and all that. And in Western American society specifically, like gambling has always kind of been seen as like this, like you can outplay, right? Blackjack, poker, etc., right? But it's still gambling. So when it comes to monetization, there are a bunch of challenges that you tend to get confronted with. And game devs, we want to make fun and engaging content. Monetization is secondary. This was a big issue that I had at Riot, where you may not necessarily know about this now, but you know, like when I was there, 2017 to about 2019, end of 2019, money was like never something that was brought into the equation. I think that there were like I honestly, like, I think the years I was there, I don't think the thought of how much money we made on stuff crossed my mind ever. And we had a couple of people who worked in like monetization, but like I was told that one of my friends worked there. He's like, I hated my job, and I was like, why? He's like, I couldn't convince the devs to make money, and I was like, oh, that's crazy. And it's because we were just super very like player experience first. Nobody cared. We just wanted to focus on making the coolest product for the player. We just happened to make a ton of money doing it. But we contrast that with stakeholders and investors, and they ultimately need there to be effective monetization, and that causes this, no matter what, like opposition that exists between the two parties, and that results in this like conundrum, right? Ultimately in monetization, but also specifically in gambling. So right now, a lot of research tends to suggest that continuous monetization strategies, what that essentially means is strategies that are ongoing, money that is not like short-term orientated, but rather long-term orientated. They tend to yield higher value, return of investment from the product, right? In the case of freemium products, so you know, free games that tend to have premium elements to it, so monetization like cosmetics, etc. They tend to find that they have really solid return of investment if they focus on strategies that allow a consumer to not overly index rapidly, but rather incrementally index into the product. So spoke to a researcher, Antonin Patilla, who noted that top performing games do not generate higher amounts of revenue through gambling. And he defines gambling here as like loot boxes, right? Loot crates and gotcha mechanics. But what's interesting is that despite the fact that all evidence tends to suggest that gambling doesn't make more money, gambling is becoming more and more prevalent in the US, specifically the US. It's not as common in the European regions, but there's a kind of a bridge that's been splitting between the EU and the US in terms of like what we would define as markets. And the European market is a little bit different than the American market, which we'll probably touch on a little bit too. But yes, American audiences have more or less pivoted towards the stratum of monetization in games and in games adjacent that is almost exclusively gambling. So we'll do a quick brief analysis. This was actually ill-timed because I made this presentation before the recent layoffs that happened for Battlefield 6. So, but I feel kind of bad because I wrote this down a couple months back, and then like shortly after that, I saw like a ton of layoffs happen directly related to this. But anyways, we'll dive into it. Helldivers 2, continuous monetization. We have battle passes that don't expire. So I don't know I don't know if many of you have played Helldivers 2. I imagine some of you have. You can, I can quit the game, today or tomorrow, and then come back 2 years later, and they have battle passes that I can go back to, and I can purchase these battle passes. It doesn't matter when, right? And that's kind of a really cool element. It essentially means that we're removing that FOMO element for battle passes specifically, while still allowing consumers to engage with it. I spoke to another researcher, Ellen Petroskaya, and while they referenced Dota 2, still felt like it was analogous to Helldivers in that they felt that yes, a battle pass battle passes tend to have rising profitability, especially in FOMO models, but it doesn't really have positive effect on engagement. Now, why that's relevant is because oftentimes the main reason that people engage in these FOMO element style of FOMO, fear of missing out style of battle pass is because they think that it'll make players stay online and then engage. And the hypothesis, you'll see this in tons and tons of content that people make about monetization, is you make the player feel like if they don't participate today, that they're going to miss out. And if they feel like they're going to miss out, they're going to engage, and that'll keep your engagement up. And then engagement up it means that they have higher opportunities to convert from a non-spender to a spender. But a lot of data is starting to suggest, as it's being gathered, that the FOMO model is not optimal. Now we'll compare that to the FOMO monetization that Battlefield has. Battlefield 6 has the traditional battle pass. Players can miss the battle pass. EA reported 1.9 billion in revenue, with a significant amount from Battlefield 6. Not a clear and disclosed amount. They tend to keep that internal, and I don't know, but I have a idea on how much it is. And however, there's clear and expressed like player frustration with this and there's a known quantity of reduced engagement. Interestingly enough, Helldivers 2 has been out for 2 years, right? It's 2 years and change. Helldivers 2 at this time, I think it might be on this next slide. Let's see. Let's see if I added it in. Yeah. Yeah, there it is. So Helldivers 2, we'll talk about the lower spend penetration first, but I want to talk about this real quick. Helldivers 2 had 150,000 active users in 2026. In February 2026, Battlefield 6, despite a massive surge in the beginning, I think it was over nearly 1 million players, only has 40,000 active users, which tends to give off this impression that that FOMO style of approach is not retaining the consumers that they expect that they're going to be having. Now, going on spend penetration, what that essentially means is the depth at which a consumer is going to spend on your game. So, because of the fact that Helldivers 2 costs, I believe, if I remember correctly, $19.99, that means that that's a premium game. Ergo, they're going to spend less money on the game because they've already spent a burden of $20, right? That didn't really change for Battlefield, because Battlefield, if I recall correctly, was $69.99 and naturally had a lower spend penetration than Helldivers 2 because of the higher premium. That said, though, Helldivers 2 has a wider breadth of consumers that spend. They have a higher percentage of their players that engage with spend, and that's honestly a way bigger thing that you'd want on your product. Also, I don't know if you've like explored the community for Helldivers 2, but I've never seen this before. But the Helldivers 2 community has a big habit of asking Arrowhead to monetize them more because they want them to make more money. Look, that's kind of weird to me. You don't oftentimes have consumers saying, "I need you to put in more stuff that make me spend money." Uh, Going to Battlefield 6, yeah, low spend conversion due to higher premium. Ultimately, I think they just laid off the entire team for Battlefield 6 very recently. If I remember, it's like a very large amount of people. And it's because the game is underperforming and it's no longer. I think they've changed to maintenance mode, which really sucks. But despite that data, we're shifting into the wrong direction. Why? Um, that's because of short-term quarterly profits driven by shareholders. If you are socially aware and you look at the current state of the economy, right now we're in a really big K-shaped economy, which essentially means that the rich are getting richer and the poor are suffering, even though the economy is going, woohoo, I'm going so big, stock market, right? Yes, if you have money, you get more money. If you don't have money, you don't get more money. So right now we're finding that the basically quarter over quarter we have companies that are especially publicly owned needing to report to their shareholders that they're making money, and that means that they need to take actions that are short-term oriented, not long-term oriented. We're also in a vibe-based market, and that's a little bit more problematic in that we're kind of like, yeah, we should make this go up. This is good. Why? I don't know. Just vibes. I mean, GameStop stock is one that I like to talk about of like a big problem that showcased how the stock market is not real. We have in games we have an over saturated industry. I mean, how are you going to make live ops game number 37 when you have to compete with Fortnite, League of Legends, etc., right? And ultimately, we're shifting towards a more gamified society where all of these models that existed in games right now are now being transitioned into literally your everyday life. But we've had gamification in history, right? 19th century, we had your education-based system, right? Points, stars, tokens. You might have had them when you were five too. I don't know. I don't know how you guys experienced kindergarten and preschool, but I got a lot of stars. And we had the piece rate systems, essentially output per unit, trying to optimize on that capacity. And there were rewards, merit-based rewards for your output. In 20th century, we had the more conventional, like assembly line, Ford model, benchmarks in working productivity scoring, national scoring, credit scores, customer loyalty models that existed with Sears catalog. In the 21st century, we started building up preliminary data analysis as the data science field kind of like, started flourishing and being built up. And we started focusing around these kind of algorithmically engaged strategies that focused around gamifying every facet of your life and introducing rituals, right, that are integral to your well-being, which is kind of where we're at in the last 10 years, where now we have stuff like psychological contracts through streaks. We have personalized gamification where products that you engage with, external to games or internal to games, all are focused on what do you need to keep online. And then the lifestyle algorithm drive, meaning that ultimately everything that you engage with is going to have some type of adjustment towards you through the algorithm that dictates who you are as a person, and oftentimes can predict who you are as a person, which is a little scary. So, where are we right now? Gamified systems right now. We have a lot of it through integrated through engagement retention mechanics. I'm sure I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, use social media in some capacity that seem to have some weird understanding of exactly who you are, or what you want to look at, or what they think you want to look at, and they dictate. They can inform your behavior. They can dictate your behavior. They can predict your behavior. Data analysis is often used to create these models that are black boxed, and they force you to stay online and continue scrolling. We doom scroll all the time. We've normalized it, right? That's kind of like what's been going on. We're engaging in normalization. The big failure point occurred in 2017 with the Supreme Court decision Murphy versus Collegiate NCAA, National Collegiate Athletic Association. This essentially legalized sports betting. And once sports betting became legalized, then that was the easiest way to segue towards allowing consumers to be able to engage and want to engage, because it's a very common trope that normal people will be able to start pivoting towards these gamification models. We started seeing a huge shift in society towards all of these monetization models starting to pivot in. And now we also have stuff like the stock market, as I mentioned, being based on vibe-based models, and they tend to be almost contingent on social trends. Heck, I mean, right now the stock market goes up, down, depending on what Trump tweets out. and then what Iran tweets out in response, right? It's crazy to me though is like stuff like these stats: 72% of teens below 18 have gambled in some capacity online physically. Based on that metric, with 8 people in call, that means 6 of you have gambled in some capacity online, before the age of 18. Um, we also see that algorithms now exist on most platforms, right? Almost, I mean, essentially all platforms. I don't think there may be some that exist without as impactful of an algorithm, but I mean they're pretty essential towards success. Um, in the future, we have stuff that are likely going to be happening. Financial institutions, as I had mentioned, are touching and integrating gamification models. I think Robinhood is a big one that's been doing that, arguably an institution. Bank of America talked about wanting to integrate daily login calendars and the capacity to have a direct connection to poly markets. So that way, when you get your direct deposit, you can immediately bet, one quick bet, right? That's crazy. We have AI integration that's basically optimizing these engagement algorithms and building up the models even more and more accurately to the point that they become an everyday part of your ritual. And then you're finding yourself getting more and more stressed. And then we're finding yourself the financial burden associated with all of this gamification to the extent at which everything is essentially advertisements left and right, and everything is just forefront to your mind. And it's causing this massive financial burden, and bankruptcies currently are at a record high. If I recall correctly, last I checked, we are at a 35 or 37% increase in bankruptcies, personal bankruptcies, this in the year 2025 specifically. Sorry, we don't have a report yet for 2026. It's too early. So we're going from engagement to disenfranchisement, and that's going to cause more problems, right? Going to the next slide real quick. We're gonna touch on this to give you some idea, but I'm gonna go dive deeper into it into the next slide. But right now we're at that point where these are some psychological risks that exist. Behavioral addiction, dopaminergic dysregulation. Shoot, sorry, I have a hiccup. Dopaminergic dysregulation, which is essentially like microdosing with dopamine. We have stuff like cognitive distortions, normalizations of risk taking, erosion of intrinsic motivation, emotional regulation, mental health, and the ethical and social and ethical impacts. And then if we dive into the next slide, we have examples of this, right? So for behavioral addiction and compulsion, Genshin Impact, Infinity Nikki, COD Mobile, other gotcha systems, they all have LTOs. They have oftentimes variable reward odds, and these are in some cases black box, which essentially means that you can't see them as a player. And then they set up sunk cost fallacies where you're like, well, I pulled 10 times. What if I just pull an 11th time? Dopaminergic dysregulation involves like the microdosing that exists through TikTok or Instagram, where you'll scroll through one and you'll be like, oh wow, that I like that, go again. Or TikTok has engagement rewards as you scroll and other types of stuff that have existed. Cognitive distortions through stuff like Robinhood and Polymarket. I mean, Robinhood and Polymarket like to gaslight you into thinking that you almost won. You get rewarded with confetti animations, the ritual, right? There's a ritual that's associated with this. I mean, it's the same premise of like, if you've engaged with any products, it's kind of shitty when you like open a crate and it just opens and like it doesn't feel like anything good happened. But if you open a crate and it's like the Legend of Zelda theme plays, or what, it's like and then it just slowly opens and then the gold pops up. And even if the rewards butts, you're like, wow, that felt cool, and you're like, I want to do it again, kind of thing. Super intensive and makes you feel like you almost always have a chance. And then when we look at probabilistic markets, oh man, this is a really annoying one. Guys, probabilistic markets are literally just insider trading. And there's like a huge illusion of skill right now that exists where people are like, it's not just an illusion of skill, it's literally just like people are like gaslighting themselves, thinking they're like this like huge connoisseur and like worldly person who's just engaging in polymark, and they're like, well, I predicted that this is going to happen and that's going to happen and all that, and they are engaging in this like very disconnected reality in the real world, when in reality what's happening is that there are people in the back hedging their bets because they know exactly what's going to happen, which we just see periodically, with all the war-oriented bets that have been happening right now. We have stuff that are normalizing risk taking, right? So DraftKings and sports betting are enabling manic style behaviors in relation to risk taking and making users and consumers more and more risky. And we're seeing it everywhere. I mean, heck, I live in California. We ban DraftKings. It doesn't stop there from being advertisements and letting you know that like these types of markets exist. You just can't do it in California. And just make a VPN, right? But it's really problematic. Though to be fair, I guess they technically have covers for VPNs, but It's not easily so. And then Polymarket is technically still allowed in California, so it's almost a moot point. Um, we have the erosion of intrinsic motivations. Instead of trying to like get better at something, we do it for the streaks, right? Duolingo is a huge, huge flag for this one, right? We have instead of or Snapchat, right, where your streaks correlate towards status. But they don't really mean anything. Like just because I have 100 streak on Duolingo on language doesn't mean that I have like great mastery on it. There's some tangential correlation, but oftentimes those streaks actually have very low correlation. And that's why they engage with social media campaigns to guilt you if you like break your streak, right? We have emotional regulation, mental health being affected through your rewards with Instagram likes, and Twitter engagement, and so your moods are regulated through these engagement metrics. And then there's social and ethical impacts, right? Clash Royale and other pay to win mechanisms exist. Your status is tied towards your performance, therefore it's tied to your spend and your behaviors. I use the GameStop Power Pass as someone who has spent gambled a lot on PSA slabs. That was a goofy thing that I had done, but I felt like I wanted to engage with it because my peers kind of were doing it, and I was like, this sounds like fun. Let me try it. I like to argue that I did it for research, but man, I lost a lot of value there. So what's really happening is that we're reaching a breaking point, and that's going to cause a psychological collapse when ultimately consumer spending power is too low and the burden is too high. And the burden is getting higher and higher and higher. And so at this time, right, these are reshaping your lives. Did you know, for example, that in California and in other states, we have a couple of grocery stores, Pavilion and others, that are optimized or starting to integrate A/B testing for groceries that have dynamic pricing contingent on when you arrive at the grocery store, which means that the price that I experience in the morning will be different than the price that I experience in the evening. What does that mean? That means now I've added in an additional burden on myself as the consumer of now I need to think about when I arrive at the grocery store. But then what happens when everyone realizes that? Well, now they all go in the morning. So that means that they're going to shift the model to later and then they're going to continuously adjust it. And that means that you now have to cause your life to be like you've now made a ritual for an essential, right? Hopefully that gets legislated, but let's be honest, it's not going to get legislated anytime soon. We're so cooked. So that causes disengagement. Next steps, good and realistic. As the breaking point's reached, which I believe we're approaching the breaking point at like reckless speeds. Like we're a train, right? We're a train. We're about to hit. We're about to go off the tracks. We're very close, right? We'll have alternative solutions that have a heavier focus on psychological assessment. Surprisingly, China and the EU are leading the charge here. And have identified that these types of psychological optimizations for getting every single dollar out of their consumers cause too much burden. And they're pivoting towards a more long-term oriented, like, 5-year, 10-year plan models, which allow them to get even more money oftentimes in exchange for not as much quarter-over-quarter profits. But realistically, what's actually going to happen is companies are going to double down to try to gather as much money from whales and ignore reduced spending power from dolphins and minnows. Key example, Chipotle recently announced that their target demographic are the majority of their consumers, which they believe the majority of their consumers, the average consumer, is an individual who makes over $100,000 a year. When a company that's for food, that historically was an accessible food, frames it as screw the bottom line, we're just going to go for like the people that have money, then you can kind of see like it's a paradigm that kind of exists across the board. So the inevitable outcome is the double down, and incidents like this have happened before. We had the 2000 financial crisis, we had the 2008 financial crisis, we had the 2020 pandemic. Every single time, companies will index into what will net them the most money, or what they believe. So the whales, and they ignore their lower spend consumers. And they will do everything in their power to find a way to get that money out of the everyday consumer. Well, everything except making their lives easier, right? So that results in this huge customer disenfranchisement. So with whales as the focus, normal customers feel ostracized, right? So we have systems that exist like unaffordable gotcha systems that cost $200. So what you do is it costs $200 to get the item. So why don't I just make it so it takes 50 pulls and each pull is like, I don't know, $4, right? So now the consumer won't even get it for like however long it'll take them to get it, but they'll get it eventually. but there's an illusion that it doesn't cost as much. We have risky gambling approaches with fiscal rewards. I mean, look at the massive manipulation in the market right now with Pokemon cards that have a ton of people who are engaging with it to make a lot of money, the rich, right? But then you also have the common folks that are like, oh, why don't I go and rip a bunch of Pokemon cards so I have a chance at getting that big hit, and then maybe I can grade it for a 10 or whatever so I can make more money because everyone's engaging in kind of this hustle mentality since we're finding that we're getting our spending power is diminished every single year, right? Wages are not keeping up. And then we have play to earn models, right? We have play to earn models like Web3, right? That are a game. This was the most like dystopian thing that I felt like started occurring with the pandemic, is we started having games that were like, oh my God, look, you can play our game and you can earn like $2 an hour. And I'm like, that's so messed up, guys. Like, it's not about entertainment anymore. Now it's about making money. And it just felt like we really were like putting into place like a lot of the like, this like frowned upon behavior of like people making gold on like RuneScape and selling it or whatever, or World of Warcraft and selling it. And like we used a big thing in the Western models where like we used to be like, wow, that's gross. Why would we should not let people do that. And now it's coming to us where we're like, oh, actually, you should do that. And like, oh, why don't you engage in surveys and stuff so you can make a little bit extra money? And it's a very common trope. There's tons of content on subreddits, like passive income, side hustle, where everyone's trying to figure out what to do. And in the pandemic, we introduced the buy now, pay later, as well as lease and loan models. Fun fact. Recently, I went to buy a skin on Overwatch, the Hello Kitty bundle. I bought it for my friend, and I looked at it and I was like, I can Klarna the $60 bundle. And then I thought to myself, that's kind of crazy because it's not even like you don't even own the product that you buy when it comes to these digital games. So I'm buy now pay latering a product that I will never own, which I find completely insane. What does this lead to? Well, it is going to lead to a fundamental market collapse. It's also going to lead to a caste system being established in games, and that already exists to an extent. But there's kind of an illusion of fairness, but it's going to get worse and worse as the delta between the lowest end spenders and the highest end spenders continue to like become wider and wider. And like I said, like we're in a K-shaped economy, and it's only going to get worse because the companies are failing to recognize that they need to address the other side of the K, right? There is potential. We can salvage it. But really, what we've done here is that historically, for the last 40 years, right, the Western markets have always been the innovators that led the gaming industry to be where they are, and we're losing so hard. And the Eastern companies, primarily China, are becoming complete industry leaders on figuring out the optimal way to maintain player retention, as well as focusing on their like long-term revenue gains. What is the solution? Well, I have a couple of ideas. It's easier said than done naturally. Reducing the focus on quarter-over-quarter profits and focusing on long-term profits, but that requires a shift in mentality for the investors. And in a exclusively capitalistic, unregulated market, that's not going to happen. We need to create models that feel more fair, that are more engagement orientated versus monetized rewards. That means stuff that are more battle pass versus pay to just purchase immediately. Those tend to feel better for Western audiences. We need to use our data that we gather to inform user behavior towards specifically our models and see where the aversion is happening, and then properly adjust instead of simply looking at what has optimally created the number to go up and then immediately deleting the project when the number doesn't go up anymore. In an ideal world, you lobby your local government officials to focus on reducing that consumer burden, or federal, right? A big one is forgiving student loans. Guess what? If we forgave all student loans across the board, on average, that gives almost every American about $450 of additional money they could spend that goes back to the economy, which will literally pay for itself within, like, I believe, a month. But we don't want to do that because, I don't know, we hate people. And then ultimately, we want to create monetization models that have backing by psychological research rather than letting monetization be created with folks who are MBA driven, right? Like you just have a bunch of people who focus on the bottom line and they look at how to make the money go up. Gaming companies need to stop hiring product managers and need to start hiring like designers that focus on the user experience. As well as psychological support to identify where things are failing. And we also just need more research. So if you're getting a PhD, you should get a PhD in game design and figure out help me here because your research I will use in the future to inform my decisions. Here's some citations of a couple of like stuff. I'll share. I believe I gave my presentation over to Wyatt as well, so I'm sure it can get shared out to you guys so you can take a look. I don't really mind. And here, rest of the time, by all means, I'm happy to answer any and all questions. And this is my LinkedIn. Should have been a QR code, but yeah, I forgot. Cool. Well, you guys can take the floor, and I'm gonna pull a notepad up so I can write anything down. I don't know how you guys tackle questions though.
Awesome. Yeah, if anybody had any questions, feel free to either type it in the chat or give a little like
Oh, there's a chat.
high five emoji, a reaction, and then you can take the floor.
Cool. You want to just call on them?
Yeah, yeah, Bernice, you can go ahead.
Yeah, hi. I think it was great to hear from you, especially since you had a sociology background. I'm also studying sociology right now alongside with computer science. And
Nice.
I know you got more into kind of uh like the capitalist structure that we have and more so like the economics, and you referenced like Marx and Weber in the beginning. I also found that like sociology is very relevant to some of like the ethics of game development. And I know that wasn't really the focus on your talk today, but does anything like immediately come to mind when it comes to, kind of like the different working environments you had throughout your career, or like, yeah,
Oh yeah,
I'll just cut it
I
there.
got
Yeah.
you. No, I got you. See, that's a really interesting question. Because put yourself in the position. If you're, are you a sociology? Do you mind if I ask? Are you a sociology major? Or are you getting a minor?
Yeah, I'm pursuing the major, but computer science is my first one, so we'll see if I can graduate with it. Yeah.
Sure, cool. Um, if you're majoring in it and you're studying in that capacity, one thing you're going to learn is that the concept of the premise of a sociologist is oftentimes when we look at the topics, we're like, it's pretty obvious what's going wrong here, guys. And then you go and tell like you go and tell like people that are in like that have the agency to actually do something, and you say, look, I have data that suggests that this is this, right? Like why don't we fix it, right? And they say, gotcha, I see your data, and then like blank, done, right? They don't respond. That's the life of a sociologist. In my in my experience, I spoke to a ton of my UCSD professors in the sociology department, and tons of folks that pursue sociology. And the usual rule of thumb is that we tend to know, and we just are depressed because it doesn't matter that we know, because no one cares. Now, how does that apply to my career? Because that's ultimately like what's popped in. I mean, I've had moments where it felt like my interest in sociology. To be fair, I only recently got my college degree. I went back to school and I was doing school full time while working at a couple of different companies. I think where I was at Activision when I started. Um, at Riot, it felt like ethics were more important, and we cared more about it, and how we wanted to tackle the player experience. That's the key thing is that, Riot had a pillar back in the day that was literally player experience first. We ultimately do everything for the player. That was a foundational element of like what we were supposed to be. I don't think they have that value anymore. I think it's changed, but I wouldn't know because I haven't paid attention. Activision is where I was at when I was about a year into my sociology degree. And I started recognizing that like a lot of what we did was really focused about how to make the money go up in contrast to what I believed would be optimal for the player. But I still found avenues in which I could introduce things like variances and variabilities that I felt would likely have a positive effect as I did things like ethnographies and other types of like research that I did conducted independently with our own data set. And ethnographies, I guess, would be one of them, survey results, random sampling, etc. Like, and I got a bunch of data that supported like what I wanted to do. And I built up some models and it made us a ton of money, right? But it's hard to sell it to people because if you frame it as I feel this, and the data suggests that this is what it would what would happen if we do this. It tends to not sell very well, especially when you're in an ecosystem that is very monetization and money driven. So I had to run A/B tests. I think it took 6 months for me to build my proposal and then ship it to players. And dude, it like increased my revenue by like 40%. It was great. I would say it's less about the ethics of sociology because I don't look at sociology from the lens of ethics, because there's obviously like a different path of how you can tackle sociology, right? There are degrees that are literally just ethics, right, and morality and other things. Well, those are and they're subjective in many cases, or morality is subjective, not necessarily ethics. But the premise of sociology for me is to be able to have a clear understanding on human behavior. And then if I look at it abstractly and understand how humans are behaving in a community, you can kind of see why that connects really deeply with game design and game dev. Because oftentimes you're making products in mind for your consumers, and it makes a lot of sense to have somebody that has insights into how people are going to be engaging with each other, right? So I kind of love that you're a sociology and a comp sci major, because I think that no offense to the comp sci majors here, but more STEM majors need to take arts classes in humanities. It gives you so much value. Um, but like yeah, I mean ultimately it's something that I think empowers you and I think gives you a lot more agency in the long term. So I encourage you to try to get both if you can. I'm not biased, I swear. I saw somebody raise their hand. So
Um,
hello.
Anybody else? Any questions? Oh, yeah, Safine.
Yeah. Uh, so going back to like your solutions with the ones in like italics, I was wondering like how what is it? Like in
Let's see.
terms of like lobbying the local government and then for that stuff, how likely do you think like those are to ever happen? And like what do you think we can do to like make them more likely to happen?
I mean, you tell me, right? Like your thoughts here, right? So I have my understanding of it, and I have and like I frame this presentation of I am somewhat of a nihilist, which ultimately does tend to contribute to like where I think things are going to go. But I mean, I look at Europe, and Europe is able to. There's by the way, why there's someone in the waiting room. I look at Europe, and I see that Europe is able to do this, right? And they've a lot of European models have shifted into this like socio-capitalistic environment. Um, and for some reason that tends to scare a lot of people. I think it's very feasible here, and I think that with the current status of society and where we've been at now, I think that the probability goes up as more and more people reject the fact that like right now we're I mean hey, I live in California. My gas recently right next like down the street, my gas just hit $9 a gallon, right? There is a breaking point. We are rapidly reaching the breaking point. When we reach the breaking point, then change tends to be a lot more radical. Um and I think that means that there's a higher probability that change that we can see shifts in this mentality. I think there's a positive chance given avoiding any shenanigans for stuff to be addressed in 2028. Uh, but who knows, right? Like we really don't know, and we really can't say until we see it because the world is so um tumultuous. I think that's what I'm looking for. And I think that as people realize that life sucks, even though the Dow is at over 50,000, it's not. Then ultimately people will be able to put adequate pressure on elected officials. So I guess like I would posit the question back to you, and you don't necessarily need to answer it, but it's like my feeling is it's possible, but I'm not willing to say at this current time that it's probable yet. I'm gonna say if I were to be a betting man, I'm gonna give it a solid 35% chance in the next 3 years.
All right, thank you for the answer.
For sure.
Awesome. Any other? Oh, yep, Zion.
Yeah, so I don't know if you would address this or not, but I remember earlier you're talking about how there's like the sort of conflict inherently with like stakeholders and then like the players. So I kind of wanted to ask like,
Oh, the
you know,
devs to clarify,
or
not the players.
oh yeah, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. So like the devs, which I guess are usually more player focused in their what they want, right?
Yeah.
So I guess my question is like, I feel like yeah, the problem is like, stakeholders think in terms of okay, yeah, well, what will make the profit and maybe are people that won't really care about playing games themselves. So because like these are very opposing sides, like I guess what are ways to sort of like mend the two? Like do we need to get more, I guess, dev gamer focused people into stakeholder positions? Like what do you think?
Honestly, that's not a bad idea. I mean, yeah, really, like it's kind of like what I mentioned of how I think companies need to stop hiring MBAs with like product manager MBA kind of angles and hire like if they want to hire a product manager, they can, but it should be like more design oriented product managers instead that focus on the players, right? And that would help a lot. But the big problem here is ultimately like there are a ton of studios that you like if you guys are active on LinkedIn you might see like active on LinkedIn you might see people getting laid off left right up down in games like every single day. I mean heck there's been I think literally 1,000 at Epic recently, right? And it's like ultimately it goes into the situation where a lot of the companies that exist with smaller studios that exist with double A's, right? They tend to be companies that are funded, $1 million, 2 million, 5 million, 10 million, to like make their product. And then like ultimately, like how do you resolve the conflict when someone is giving you $10 million to make a game? And therefore they're expecting their money, like they're expecting a return of investment, right? So are they not justified in saying, I give you 10 million, I want money, right? Because they didn't give you that 10 million for free. That's not angel funding. It's not a gift. It's they're investing in you with the expectation that you're going to succeed. So on one hand, the stakeholders argument kind of makes sense. I'm not if they're giving you 10 million and they like like you should do something with it. On the other hand, the game devs feel like they in theory they likely have a strong understanding of what they need to make that money, and they need the confidence of a stakeholder, right? So there has to be like some mutually assured like discussions where on one hand, I think the stakeholders need to have a better understanding of how the pipeline actually works and where they're going to get their money. On the other hand, the game devs, which it's a very common trope that we run into, a lot of game devs don't really know how to make money, right? I mean, you see like companies trying, for the upteenth time to make another live ops game because they think that's the cash cow, and it's not. We saw Concord fail. I think Highguard just shut down like only a couple days, like 2 weeks ago. And we just see these companies keep trying to make a live ops model over and over again without effective business strategies. So it's almost like we should have designers in the stakeholders department, and we should have monetization designers and monetization folk in the dev department, right? If we can develop and communicate and articulate the best ways to tackle the strategies, then maybe we can solve a lot of these problems. Or alternatively, we engage in more indie development or single A development, and that tends to, and I can see that also happening instead, where people just ship smaller games. And maybe we shouldn't have, every other game launch with a $10 million budget because it's unsustainable. Yeah.
Awesome. Anybody else have any questions? If not,
We'll answer anything.
I had a question, if that's all right. So I know you talked about your thoughts on like Riot in particular for your like past companies, but are there any other monetization practices from companies you've worked at that maybe you don't work at anymore that you kind of disagree with or have any hot takes on?
It's a little hard to answer because I don't want to I don't want to uh say anything bad about a previous company, right? So what I think an easier way to do it is as I will abstractly answer your question, but because I'm pretty familiar with a multitude of different like models, and I'll just like tell you examples of models that I'm not a big fan of instead. Um, I really I think the daily login calendar, for example, sucks. I think that it is really crappy to put a daily login calendar that lasts 28 days, and it means that a player needs to log in every single day for 28 days to get the biggest reward. I think that when consumers do that, that's really harsh, and it means that I don't have agency. I think, you know what? I'll reference League for this. I used to be a very skilled League of Legends player. I used to when I was working at Riot, I was like master tier, and before I worked at Riot, I was challenger, and then after I quit Riot, I was challenger regularly. Um, I prior to I want to say 2018 or 2019, there was never a banking system. You would decay within 1 day, right? If I didn't play my game, like I would decay. So eventually, Riot introduced a friendlier model where I could play 10 games in 1 day, and now I have 10 days to break, right? That's an example of like an engagement and retention model that really sucks for engaged players, because that essentially means if I go on vacation, I'm going to lose my challenger rank, and that's messed up, right? A lot of companies still do that to this day, where they punish you for taking a break for even a single day. I find that no forgiveness mechanics really, really sucks. Um, but I also don't like it if there are forgiveness mechanics that require you to pay for your forgiveness. There was a period of time when Snapchat would allow you to bring your streak back, but you paid like 99 cents, right? That's stupid. It's really punishing to like engage with those types of like behaviors, because all it does is it just makes it so like me as the consumer, I feel like this is my life. I have no life except this. And like there's the joke of like if you're a gamer, you have no life because you just play games all day or whatever. But they are literally trying to like force that agenda. I should not wake up in the morning, brush my teeth, and say, "Shit, I gotta log in really quickly so I can get my maintain my streak. Otherwise, it's going to expire." I shouldn't be out on a date and think to myself, "Oh man, like if I don't like pull up my phone right now and engage in my streak, that this is going to like break something." An example of the daily login calendar thing that I mentioned is like I'm a big proponent of the 21-day login calendar. We're giving you 7 days of breathing room. That means that if I decide to not log in 1 day, I'm not completely punished. But it still lets me like engage. I think that like that's like my biggest like complaint. I think that, and like you can probably tell like I really don't like FOMO systems like for battle passes. I'll still do them because it's a known system to work that works, as long as I'm convinced that the product is not something that I expect is supposed to maintain a 5-year plan, and it's something that's like maintaining a shorter term plan. I think it's fine because you're expecting it to like not last long enough for that retention mechanism to matter. But if you make a product that is supposed to be generational, then it doesn't make any sense, right? Um, yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
For sure.
Awesome. And then anybody else?
Hi, I joined a little bit late, so I missed the speaking part.
Oh,
But I have a question about sorry if this was something we went over already,
no worries.
but I'm curious about what are some core differences between mobile monetization versus like PC or controller monetization?
Oh man, I feel like that distinction has just been like the problem is that that distinction has shifted so badly, and like nowadays, like you might see an overlap like that's like a little too egregious. And I think that's been a big problem in like PC games, where like it's like one thing that I chatted about it briefly during the presentation, not the comparison specifically that you asked, but like I mentioned, like it's silly that Battlefield 6 has a bunch of MTX transactions and other things like that, while also simultaneously charging you $70 for a product, whereas a lot of these mobile games and stuff like are like, oh, we're free, but you can like pay a little bit of money incrementally to engage with them, right? I mean, it has there a lot of systems tend to overlap. I mean, you'll see like the daily login calendar exist on a lot of PC games and mobile games. You'll see the battle pass exist on PC games and mobile games. You'll see those overlaps and systems tend to exist because they tend to operate under the same vein. We haven't gotten, fortunately or not fortunately, like we haven't gotten to the point where like there are common positions in which there are ad placements in your PC games yet. Uh, yet. Not that that's not going to happen. It's for sure going to happen. I'm sorry, guys. Um, but like, no, I would say like it's pretty. They are really close and interchangeable right now. Mobile used to be the one I like. I'm sure many of you are aware. Mobile used to be the one where everyone was like, "Wow, this is egregious," and like it's like there's so much monetization everywhere. But now it's like I don't know, man. Like I pull up my mobile game and I like compare it to like I don't know, game number I don't B, and I like pay attention like to them. I'm like, I don't know, like this was meaningfully different. I mean, this one just the PC game just feels like I'm spending more money upfront, for more content in theory. But like if I want to have, but like I guess like the mobile games tend to be a lot more aggressive with their monetization, faster, and oftentimes tend to be not tend to be more gameplay orientated. I think a good example is like Scopely, as a company has a model they tend to engage in oftentimes, like super often, where you play the game for like, I don't know, 3 hours, 4 hours, and now you have to wait like a period of time to continue playing the game. Or you could pay like, I don't know, $1.99 so you can get the time boost, and then it'll reduce the amount of time so you can engage again, right? Because a lot of their games are turn-based auto battler kind of like models. I think Marvel Strike Force is an example. Um, it works really well. It's super effective monetization. Um, but as you can see, it's like it almost is kind of pay to win, right? Because you're paying for your time. They tend to operate as pay to win via time models versus free for patience, right? I don't think PC does that much yet. Yet.
Awesome. Do we have any other questions?
We'll answer anything. Probably.
All right. I think everyone is all set.